I just got home from the game. The Oilers stink. Let's get to work.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Loser Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, we're going to walk through a loss to the Devils in what was a frustrating performance on several different levels. We're going to start with just the macro, the flow of the game, what it felt like, how the Oilers played. Going to dissect specifically the lineup split tonight, a very top-heavy approach from Kris Knoblauch in trying to find a way to win this game that the Oilers very clearly were pressing hard for. And then we'll pivot to where they go this weekend. No rest for the weary. Right back in action tonight, I should say, because we're recording this on Friday morning now, and they're right back in action tonight on the second half of a back-to-back against the Islanders. And let's start with the macro, the big picture, where they were at coming into tonight. So you lose Monday in Buffalo. You get 3 days off. You get Tuesday, Wednesday, tonight, you're back in action. You spend that time trying to get right. You're still not at full strength, still no Ekholm. You're figuring out what you're doing with Klingberg. You're starting to integrate Max Jones and Jake Wallman further and further with every game played. You would expect their results to get a little bit better, for them to look a little more comfortable. You're coming in here to play the Devils, the Islanders, and the Rangers. As we established earlier in the week, including Buffalo, who they played earlier in the week, Buffalo, the Devils, the Islanders, the Rangers are all bottom 10 defensive teams in the NHL. They all struggle to limit scoring chances against. They struggle. The Rangers and the Devils in particular struggle to limit high danger chances against. And the Oilers, over the course of the last 10 to 15 games or so, have really struggled to score, averaging under 2 goals per game at 5-on-5, which is just frankly not going to cut it in today's NHL. The goaltending has been particularly abysmal, and I think tonight, from the conversations I had with my friends who I went to the game with, a few people on Twitter in DMs, at a certain point, you're actively hindering the team, and I don't think Stu was atrocious tonight, but the two of the 3 Devil goals are just, you can't have those go in. I know there's layers of traffic. I know there's screens, but you needed this game if you were the Oilers. And the Devils played well earlier in the week. The win against Columbus was huge for them in trying to buy themselves a little bit of space in terms of the Eastern Conference playoffs. But no Jack Hughes, no Dougie Hamilton. Devils' best forward, best defenseman, both out, at least until, in Dougie Hamilton's case, if the Devils were to make the second round or maybe the conference final, Dougie Hamilton could come back. Jack Hughes will not be playing hockey again until the fall. The Oilers came into this game with all of the environmental factors lined up for them. Multiple days off to get healthy. You're integrating Jake Wallman, who's going to take some of the workload off the plate of Evan Bouchard and Darnell Nurse. You're playing a team that is porous defensively, that started their backup goalie. Everything in this game was lined up for you to take advantage. And I think, to their credit, the Devils came out with a game plan to really try and slow this game down, to keep it out of transition, because that's where the Oilers, when McDavid at least is out there, that's when they're at their most dangerous. And it really jumped out to me how early on in this game Kris Knoblauch went to loading up Connor, Leon, and Hyman together. And that's going to be the crux, the main point of our second segment, so I don't want to step on it too early. But the simple fact is, when you put your 3 best forwards all on one line, that puts a massive responsibility on the rest of your lineup to figure something out. It is the most sink or swim thing a head coach can do in what wasn't a do or die game. This wasn't game 82. You got to win to make the playoffs. This wasn't a division game. This wasn't even a conference game, but you could tell based on how aggressive Chris Knobloch's minutes allocations were tonight, especially knowing they're going to play again 24 hours later, on the second half of a back-to-back against an Islanders team that is desperately trying to stay alive in the playoff race. If you are going to aggressively manage your bench the way they did, that tells you the Oilers really wanted to win this game. And of course, you want to win every game, but Chris Knobloch is not ignorant of the conversations that are permeating right now around his team and the way his guys probably feel after the last 2 weeks. This was ostensibly a 50-50 hockey game for 45 minutes, 48 minutes, and the Devils really did a nice job of slowing this game down, of turning this into a dump and chase game. And the Devils are not to be confused with the Hurricanes or the Panthers or the Stars. The Devils are not a particularly physical team. They are not a particularly cycle-heavy team. When the Devils are at their best, it's Jack Hughes, it's Jesper Bratt, it's Timo Meier off of the rush using their skating to create space. And tonight, it was sustained zone time. It was point shots. It was traffic in front. It was screens. And it was working the cycle. And the Devils, to their credit, made the Oilers work extremely hard. And in the non-Connor Leon minutes, the Devils did a great job of putting the Oiler players in conflict and putting them in a disadvantageous position. And that's always what we talk about here on Locked On Oilers. The idea that when you are in the offensive zone, even if you're not going to score, you can have productive shifts in that zone. Even if you don't generate a lot of scoring chances, even if you just cycle the perimeter of the offensive zone, you drew a bunch. The Devils drew several penalties in this game, a lot of penalties on both sides in this game. Very clunky, very hard to get a real flow to it. There weren't a lot of chances back and forth. There were a few rush chances. Leon had a few. Connor had one or two. Connor Brown had one, Adam Henrique had one, and the Oilers are fundamentally stuck. I used the metaphor earlier in the week, and I've used it more than once this season when they've struggled. They're kind of going against a riptide right now. They are swimming as furiously hard as they can directly against that riptide, and instead of making any progress, they're staying in the same spot. They're tiring themselves out, and they're getting further away from their goal because even when they're just treading water, they're still getting pulled further and further away from the shore. And you read the signs at the beach, you understand. You want to swim parallel to the shoreline and get out of the riptide. And right now, the Oilers are swimming directly into that riptide. They're turning their head for air because they're good at swimming, and they were in this game for 50 minutes, we'll say. We'll be conservative. We'll be generous. 50-ish minutes. 10 minutes to go. They were down a goal. More than enough time. You knew you were going to get at least 4 more Connor and Leon shifts. That brings me to one last thing I want to get in here before we take our first break. I want to say it was with 4 minutes to go, the Oilers had a stoppage in play, and there was a TV timeout. The ice crew came out to scrape the ice, and coming out of that TV timeout, he sent out, I believe it was Matthias Janmark, Jeff Skinner, and I forget the other forward that was out there. But every fiber of my being was screaming at the top of my lungs, call timeout. You want to get Connor and Leon out there because you want to establish offensive zone possession so you can pull Stuart Skinner as soon as you can. And the Oilers, to their credit, they got 1 or 2 decent looks in the 6-on-5, but nothing particularly dangerous. The best chances were ones that didn't end up manifesting into actual shots on goal. So we are going to take our first break of this very melancholy and frankly depressing episode of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to dive into just how good Connor and Leon were tonight and how little the rest of their team did to pick them up right after this. If you're like me, Your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee, but I got tired of settling for grocery store brands and chains that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee, next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the United States, bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or you're like me and you know exactly what you like, they will handpick the perfect match for you. Trade Coffee has a quiz where in under a minute they can match you with a roast that smells fresh and tastes even better. The first bag is a game changer. Such a smooth, rich flavor, and you can taste the difference from your normal cup. And if you don't love your first bag, no worries. Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering listeners of this show 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. One more time, that's drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderellas and who's going to win the whole thing. Now, full disclosure, I don't watch a ton of college basketball. I watched my first full college basketball game last Saturday. No, 2 Saturdays ago when I physically went to the St. John's game. So I will be very chalk. I will be taking favorites. And FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. And the FanDuel app is simple to use. And when I win, I get paid out instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all March long. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Loser Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we painfully reminisce about another 3-2 loss to a struggling team. And context does matter. The Devils are trying to find their footing without their 2 most important players. They've been comfortably in a playoff spot since mid-November, and barring something truly disastrous, they should be able to pick up enough points down the backstretch of these final 15 or so regular season games to stay in the mix, and they will almost assuredly be modest underdogs to the Carolina Hurricanes, who are pretty comfortably in front of them now. And Carolina and New Jersey presents an interesting first-round matchup. They met in the playoffs 2 years ago, and Carolina really outplayed them. Carolina, very a physical team, lots of cycle, lots of dump and chase, and really wore the Devils down over the course of that brief 5-game series. And the Devils have actively tried to get a little bit heavier, a little bit more difficult to play against. They've targeted certain guys. Paul Cotter comes to mind, somebody who was particularly noticeable tonight as far as having a physical element to their game. And it's not that the Oilers played terribly. It's not even that they were thoroughly outplayed. This was a coin flip game for 50-ish minutes, and even down to that last shift where they got the one really good look off the one-timer to Draisaitl on the flank, and he didn't have the angle. His stick wasn't in the right place to tee it up. He missed the one-timer. The puck went into the corner. They got one more regroup, but they didn't ultimately settle. And I mentioned it in the first segment, and we'll get to it now. Based on the way Chris Knoblauch managed his bench in this game, you could tell the Oilers needed this one. And I said it to my friends after the second penalty kill in quick succession in the first period. Immediately, Knoblauch went to Connor, Leon, and Hyman, as he's very known to do. None of those guys kill penalties. You want those guys as fresh as possible. And from there, they got a heavy allocation of minutes. So looking at my notes here, Connor, Leon, and Zach Hyman at 5-on-5 played 14:40 in this game of ice time. At 5-on-5 alone, the next closest line in terms of 5-on-5 minutes was Podkolzin, Nugent-Hopkins, and Connor Brown. No, excuse me. It was Arvidsson, Adam Henrique, and Jeff Skinner. I was looking at the wrong column. And we're talking about almost 3 times as much ice time in this game, Connor, Leon, and Hyman, than the next closest line. 5:13, if we were to do the math out. So real quick, just because I like pulling out the calculator on the show so you can see me do this in real time. So 5 times 60 seconds is 300 seconds. Plus 13, 313 seconds. 14, so 14 times 60, that's 840 seconds. Plus 40, 880. 313 is 35% of the ice time that Connor and Leon had in this game. Connor, Leon, and Hyman had at 5-on-5 in this game. We're talking about almost 2/3 more ice time than these. And this is one of the most aggressive splits I can ever recall seeing in terms of minute allocation in the game. And to be fair, a lot of penalties in this game. And with that, because none of Connor, Leon, and Hyman kill penalties, you're going to be able to roll them more consistently at 5-on-5. And when the Devils had 3 power plays and the Oilers had 1. So 4 total power plays in the game and 3 for New Jersey. So that's 3 2-minute blocks that Connor, Leon, and Hyman got to sit and then come back out. After that, the 2 power plays were pretty close to each other in that first period. And because of that, you were able to go back to Connor, Leon, Hyman pretty successfully. And the big thing for me, the massive takeaway, and why I think this game is really emblematic of the Oilers' struggles as of late. In their 14 minutes of ice time at 5-on-5, they had a 23-6 advantage in scoring chances, 13-2 in shots on goal advantage, 2 goals for, no goals against, 1.56 expected goals to 0.05, not tenths, hundredths of an expected goal. And they had 8 high danger chances and conceded none in their ice time. Utter domination in the Connor, Leon, and Hyman minutes. And that was not enough to win tonight against not a good team. Look, the Devils are a playoff team. If you want to say they're good, okay. That is not a team that the Oilers should be having trouble with. If the Oilers are as good as they're supposed to be, if they are playing at their absolute best, the Oilers can win this game. And instead, this was a lot of, we got to wait for Connor, Leon, and Zach to get out there. And when they got out there, they did a tremendous job. They were out there, did a tremendous job with Bouchard. Later in the game, it was a little more Nurse than Bouchard, and they had their chances. And this is a game where the lack of a supporting cast really does jump out. You're missing Warren Fogel's 20-some-odd goals. You're missing Evander Kane's 20-some-odd goals. You're missing Ryan McLeod and Dylan Holloway's speed through the neutral zone to create offense where even if it doesn't manifest in a goal, you're able to put pressure on the defense, maybe force them into mistake, take a penalty, a breakdown, and you entirely put your eggs in the Connor, Leon, and Zach Hyman basket. They did as well as they physically could, a 2-0 edge, and dominated 14 minutes at 5-on-5. And that still wasn't enough against a team that's probably a first-round exit. What does that say about you if you're the Oilers? Nothing particularly good. We are going to take our second break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll talk about where the Oil go from here, what this weekend represents, and we'll send you into the weekend and on as good of a note as we can, I guess. I'll see you guys in a second. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's really easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on takeout. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out long term. Take control of your finances now with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. One more time, that's monarchmoney.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year's subscription. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Loser Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we send you into a weekend where Oilers got work to do. I came into this week saying they needed to win at least 3 of the 4 games on this New York swing. I know they're playing the Devils, but I count that as the New York swing because you're going to stay probably in Manhattan. You're going to want to be centralized. You came here probably right after the game against the Sabres, and you've been settled for a few days now, and you're not quite in crisis if you're Chris Knobloch, but I don't know what else you can do. You went to your big guns for almost 25 minutes a pop. I mean, you played Connor McDavid almost as many minutes as your number one defenseman in this game, and that wasn't enough. And very bluntly, if running McDavid, Draisaitl, and Hyman out there every third shift against a bad defensive team, lest we forget, the Devils are playing Luke Hughes, who's 20 years old and still not great in his own zone. Simon Nemec drew back in tonight after being healthy scratched against the Blue Jackets earlier in the week. They have Brett Pesce back there. They have Brendan Dillon back there. And then who's the other veteran they have? Kovacic and Brian Dumoulin. That's not exactly the Scott Stevens, Ken Danico, Niedermeyer trio that the Devils won all those Stanley Cups with 20 years ago. Like, Dillon, Dumoulin, Pesce, those are solid pros. Kovacic, not a ton of NHL experience, not a huge profile. I like what I've seen. I thought he was pretty good tonight. He had a few really nice plays in transition with the stick to break up rushes, but there's no real number one here. I would argue there might not even be a number 2. Like, I'm a big Luke Hughes guy. Don't take this as me being a hater, me trying to crap on offense first defenseman. You guys know how I feel about Evan Bouchard. But you loaded up your big guns as much as you could in this game. They killed it for you, and that still wasn't enough. What does that say about the quality of your team right now? That if you do everything in your power to set up your best players to dominate, they thoroughly dominate, and you still lose. That's not quite a fatal flaw, but it certainly feels like this group is missing secondary scoring right now, and you hope adding Evander Kane and Trent Frederick to this mix in a month when the playoffs start is going to coax some more secondary offense because you'll get to trickle guys down. You probably slide in Kane on the third line. You bump Connor Brown down. You bump Janmark down. You slide Frederick in there. Maybe you play Frederick with Leon. Maybe you play Frederick with McDavid. Whatever you're thinking, at least you might get some reinforcements. But if you're an Oilers fan coming out of this game, I don't know how to sell you that things are going to be okay right now, because if you're Chris Knobloch, this is your empty the clip kitchen sink strategy. You load up your big guns every third shift. You play them together almost the entire game. You throw Bouchard and Wallman out there. You throw Nurse and Wallman, Nurse and Bouchard. You pull the goalie. You can't even get a good shot on goal in that 6-on-5. And you have less than 24 hours to turn it around. You'll go out to Long Island. You'll play an Islanders team that's going to be, I don't want to say locked in, but you're going to play an Islanders team that is trying to stay alive, that is a Frankenstein monster of hodgepodge pieces on the back end. They traded their best healthy center in Brock Nelson. No Matt Barzal. Bo Horvat's trying his best, but he's not he's not a superstar. He's a good player. I like Bo Horvat, but that Islanders team is as close as you're going to get. And look, I know I said that about the Buffalo game. I know I said that about this New Jersey game. If you can't beat the Islanders in a 3/4 full arena on a Friday night on one of the most godforsaken places in the world, Long Island, New York, at a certain point, we got to stop talking about the Oilers as Stanley Cup contenders. Frankly, I might be there already after the last few games. It's very hard for me to reconcile the idea with the Stanley Cup contender being unable to score more than 2 goals in games against Buffalo and New Jersey. Those are not high quality opponents, and you're supposed to beat Dallas, Colorado, or Winnipeg in the conference final. And to get there, you're going to have to go through LA and then Vegas or Vancouver or Calgary. And look, if they play Calgary, they should beat Calgary. But I can't see the Oilers right now beating Vegas. I frankly can't see them beating any of the teams in the Central right now. And look, you still got a month to iron this stuff out, to figure it out, to try and unlock whatever's wrong. But if you're Chris Knobloch, you got to be close to your wits' end because your GM didn't go get you a goalie. Your depth is not nearly as good as it was last year. And the guys who are on your team still are, or have, I should say, regressed. You know, Hyman's going to finish with less than half of what he had last year, more likely than not. Leon and Connor are doing their best, but this secondary offense in Arvidsson and Skinner and Nugent-Hopkins and even Bouchard has not manifested in the same way it did last year. And without that, you're putting an enormous microscope on Stuart Skinner, and it's very clear that even in games where he's only facing 20-something shots on goal, that might not be enough. He might not be able to meet that very, very attainable threshold. And I think that's what's so frustrating for a lot of people. And it's crazy because the one transition goal the Oilers facilitated tonight was off of a huge Stuart Skinner save. The Draisaitl goal happens because Skinner makes a ridiculous save. The rebound kicks out favorably. The Oilers break out in transition, and they just go. And Leon rips one home. And right before the Oilers came down and scored that, before Stuart Skinner made the big save, I had my phone out of my pocket, and I was typing, Skinner looks slower post to post in person than he does on TV. And he made the big save, and I was entirely astounded he made the big save to even facilitate the chance to go the other way. But this is as close as you're going to get to a do or die weekend for a team that's in a playoff spot and relatively comfortably. You have played you're going to play 4 straight teams that are actively bad at defense and don't have particularly gifted defensemen. You know, I was very high on Adam Pelech and Ryan Pulock a couple years ago. I think Noah Dobson is fine. I think he's like a B- version of what Evan Bouchard is. I do kind of like Alex Romanov a little bit more than I thought I did the more I watch him, but that is a hodgepodge of mismatched pieces, and the Islanders are going nowhere. That is not a playoff team. You need to win this game, and don't tell me Calvin Pickard's in net. I don't care. If you want to be taken seriously as Stanley Cup contenders at any point for the rest of this season, you got to beat teams like the Islanders. That's how this works. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to beat the unserious teams, because right now the Oilers are playing like an unserious team. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I will talk to you guys Monday after this weekend, and my tenor could be entirely different. Maybe they beat the Islanders and the Rangers. We go into the early next week feeling pretty good. Or if they only win one, or if they lose both, then Monday might be a little rough. I will talk to you guys then. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL, covering all of the biggest stories across the league from the local experts of Locked On. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. I'll see you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.